Hello and welcome to another in our series of videos of Edgar Cayce on from the Edgar Cayce Arizona channel. This one's entitled, What Happens to Our Souls Between Our Earthly Lives? As always, I always want to start with a disclaimer that the main source of information used for all of our presentations are the Edgar Cayce readings, although there are other sources you'll hear me refer to from time to time. We invite your questions, and we also invite you to research the topic for your own clarification. And you can check out the Edgar Cayce readings at edgarcayce.org to get to the headquarters main webpage. Want to be able to start with an agenda for this presentation, and it's a five-step organization of the topic for today. It starts out with looking after we die at a reflection and review period. So we tend to see death as an end when it's truly a homecoming when viewed from the astral plane or from the other side. And that homecoming is often followed by what we call a life review as opposed to the last judgment. That's typically followed by a period of learning and growth in which we continue to learn on the other side, just as we did on Earth. But we do so in other realms other than in, say, the schools and universities and the School of Hard Knocks here on this planet. And so we go to other realms or other dimensions in order to be able to continue our education as souls. And our astral bodies interact very much the same as they do here on Earth, only we do so in outside of three dimensions. Then comes the planning of the future incarnation. So the next lifetime that we would have on Earth, depending on our level of spiritual development, we get greater and greater participation in that. The higher our level of spiritual development, we can make a better choice as far as what's right and good for us in the next lifetime. Of course, this is also a period in between lives in which we can rest and rejuvenate. And I'll have some kind of fascinating examples of how people do that on the other side. And I want to make sure that we understand that there is a continued connection where souls, not only on the other side with the souls on Earth who are in human form at that time, but we also reconnect in other realms in order to be able to get there. So that's the order I'm going to be able to take this topic today, and let's get started. This is a quote from it's paraphrased quote, so I don't have the reading number itself, but no one enters the unseen world alone, from the Edgar Cayce reading. So Cayce is suggesting that our loved ones and spiritual guides and even the Christ consciousness itself is there to welcome us home as we pass over to the other side. And as we run into these people, you're going to get support, guidance, and reassurance as we try to acclimate to our new surroundings. Because just as we're born as a baby into the earth plane, and it takes a while to acclimate here, it also takes time to acclimate when we go from three dimensions to the astral plane. The life review, as I said, that follows often when we have this incredible homecoming is prefaced here by a reading, 5195-1, paragraph 3. For the time cometh, as it must be to this body, when no work is to be done, but ye must stand before the judgment bar of thine own conscience, as must each soul. So what this is indicating is that we are not judged by Jesus standing there with the thumb up or a thumb down when it comes to being able to say how we did that life. As a matter of fact, if you look in the lower right-hand corner, I gave a verbal description that indicates that Jesus is not standing in judgment or in condemnation of us at all. He is helping to be able to guide us and be able to explain or answer questions as we go through it. And we are able to review every single nuance of the life just passed in order to be able to glean all the information out of it. So they can be all the good times and the not so good times. And you look in the upper right-hand corner, it can see that perhaps we had an ugly divorce or something like that we have to go ahead and review and see what our role was in where things went, perhaps could have gone better in that lifetime. I don't know if you can recognize the scene in the lower left corner of the screen right now, but that is a snapshot from the movie Defending Your Life. Kind of to the left side of that picture, you see on the left Meryl Streep walking hand in hand with Albert Brooks. So it was really designed as a comedy, but it was one Hollywood interpretation of what happens after we pass over to the other side. And we're to go through a life review and have to defend our actions or explain it or learn from it. And from there, you figure out whether you return to Earth or that you move on to another realm in order to be able to continue to grow. humorous picture. So I recommend that you see it, on Netflix or whatever as soon as you can. But the whole point of this, in fact, the most important point of it is that so often we wind up having a the hardest part of the life review is when we get to see the opportunities that were presented to us that we allowed to pass. And that's a shame, because so often we had something set up where if we would only said yes or move further with it or persevered with what we were doing instead of giving up, that we could have made a real difference in the lives of others as well as within ourselves. And said that's where we have the hardest time trying to reconcile what happened in the life that just went by. A good description of this, and one of the best I can recommend, comes from a gentleman, he's now deceased, Dr. George Ritchie, MD. He spoke often for the ARE, and he wrote one of the first accounts that I'm aware of for near-death experiences. He was a soldier back in World War II, and he had pneumonia and was clinically dead for 9 minutes. And then somebody noticed that it looked like he was moving, breathing, and they injected adrenaline directly into his heart. And even though he didn't come to consciousness for about 4 days after that, his heart started beating again, and he eventually returned not only to full consciousness, but to go on to medical school and get a MD degree. Probably without me just going into all of the nuances of this book, and it's not a long one, but the nuances of the book, the one that stuck with me most was when he was with the Christ consciousness. And he said the most remarkable thing that he experienced was that Jesus impressed upon him how much he loved even the most unlovable things about him. If we can truly grasp that we are not being judged, we are not being condemned, we aren't even being frowned at, we're only being encouraged to be able to continue to go on and try to go forth and sin no more with everything that we've done. Because when God is with us, who is against us? And how long can we resist the unconditional love of our Maker? All of us will eventually make it into what we define as heaven in being one with God. So I strongly recommend, by the way, there's Return from Tomorrow, and then Return from Tomorrow, a sequel called Ordered to Return, also by George Ritchie. This one was kind of an Edgar Cayce light version of the story he experienced. Ordered to Return gets into much deeper details, and things like reincarnation were being allowed to be brought up then because it wasn't the same publisher that was afraid of those kinds of subjects on the first book that was made. So let's get into the education that we experience in life between lives. So let's say we've already started we have this incredible homecoming, and then we go through the life review to get glean all the lessons that we can out of the life just lived, and endeavor to say we are going to go forth and do better and sin no more. And the way that we do that is to go back to school. And the way that we go back to school is to go to the universities, if you will, of the different realms or dimensions that exist within the solar system, within the solar system, just like Earth kind of winds up being the test location for all that we learn in spirit. So here's a couple of readings I'll preface the rest of my description with. Thus, with this entity, 2462-2, the choices have been made through varied experiences in the earth. So there are a lot of free will choices that this particular soul, as we all have done in the earth, as well as the astrological sojourns. That would mean astrological as in going to the various houses or planets that rule our signs. For, to be sure, each soul manifests in other dimensions through sojourns in the environs about the Earth. So when it says about the Earth, that means outside of the Earth, but still within the solar system. And so that we go through sojourns or have lives that we experience in other dimensions. So the second paragraph here, paragraph 10, hence the astrological aspects become a part of the urge by the sojourn of the entity through those environments. Just as that upon which the body mental or body physical feeds, or that it digests or uses in its manner of expression, it becomes. So it says that we are, as we become enmeshed in the earth, And the things that we learn in these other dimensions to try to become better people, whereas they are tested in 3 dimensions on Earth, we wind up being able, and that becomes a part of who we are. And of course, you can say that it makes us saints or criminals, depending on how we use our free will to act upon that information. So we go to, when I say planets or dimensions, it's because the Cayce readings say in 3 dimensions, the other dimensions that are in the solar system appear to us to be planets. And in fact, when we go to the other side in the astral plane, and it's a finer body and things are not necessarily driven by the universal laws of physics within 3 dimensions, there's a whole different way of looking at life in the universe. And so planets are other realms, other dimensions, and that's where the schools are for the various things that we go into. Now, let me go ahead and give you some detail as far as what schools are available in what dimensions or what planets. So the soul growth continues, and each planet or dimension has a special emphasis for spiritual growth. It's ironic, actually, that the 7 chakras or 7 spiritual centers of the body also have their corresponding 7 planets within the solar system, so that if we need to work on things that had to do with the adrenals, then we wind up having to go to the planet that represents the things that the adrenals deal with. Now, remember, that's the fight or flight, or what we do when we get angry or warlike. And guess what? It just happens to be the planet Mars in that case. And so you wind up having as I said, ironically, it winds up being able to mirror very closely the ancient Greek and Roman gods as far as the characteristics for each one of the gods, is what each one of the 7 chakras or spiritual centers represents. Let me get into that in more detail. In this case, you're seeing a slide that we used in Edgar Cayce on the Book of Revelation. I believe that was Steve Bobbitt who did that one. But we were able to get this chart that breaks down the 7 progressions, if you will, of everything, whether it's the chakras. If you look at the top line there, we have the chakras of the root or the gonads, the Leiden, solar plexus or the adrenals, the heart is the thyroid, thymus, thyroid, pineal, pituitary is the order that the Cayce readings have for the chakras in the body. When it comes to the planets, these are the dimensions in order that the planets, even though it's not in that order as they rotate around the sun or orbit around the sun, the first dimension is Saturn, followed by Neptune, Mars, Venus, Uranus, Mercury, and Jupiter. So we have no idea what this looks like on the other side, that those are the order in which they have dimensions. By the way, I have taken all of the measurements that we have of planets, whether it's the mass, the gravitational pull, the location, even the numerology of the names of them. I've tried to put them in some kind of order, even a magnetic field or the strength of it. I have looked at it from at least a dozen different ways, and none of them that I've been able to do, at least from a 3-dimensional standpoint, put them in this order. So I don't have an answer as to why Saturn is the first dimension and so on, but this is what was given in the Cayce readings. So let me give it to you side by side. On the left column there, you're able to see the first dimension is Saturn all the way to the 7th dimension being Jupiter, and you're able to see over on the right the orbit order around Sol, the sun, in order to be able to mimic or represent what you see on the left side of the screen right now. In not one case do any of them line up with the other one. So if you were wondering how that worked, I thought I'd put it on the screen for you there. So let's start with the first dimension, and that is Saturn. Saturn is often seen as the taskmaster of the zodiac, representing structure, order, and the need for perseverance. Interestingly enough, I'll go a step further with Saturn, because it is the place, as Cayce describes it, and it might be a quote or paraphrase of the Cayce readings. It says, this is where we get rid of the dross, or what is also called insufficient matter. What that is referring to in dross is a term that's used in smelting of gold. When you're trying to get the purest gold that you can, and you melt gold because it's such a heavy element that all of the dross or the impurities go to the top, and almost like you'd scrape the cream off the top of a glass of milk. If you were to pour it right out of the cow, you do the same thing. When you smelt gold, all of the dross goes to the top. You just knock the top off, and what you're left with is pure gold underneath that. if we become so enmeshed, so entangled in the earth, so hopelessly addicted to drugs or alcohol or gambling or whatever it could be, and we feel like we can't of ourselves go back into the earth plane, even under the best of conditions, and work through this without succumbing to our addiction, we have the option of going to a place like Jupiter and that realm and being able to purify ourselves. Now, for the longest time, I looked at that as kind of like, oh my gosh, the dross, is this like the burning hell that everybody thinks of when we talk about a traditional hell, as traditional Christianity speaks of? And I came to understand that no, that's not the case. Imagine that we are subjected to the unconditional love of God, the brightest, most fiery light that is nothing but helpful and hopeful and cleansing. And we get exposed to that to the point where it actually burns away the dross in a way that, if we do not have fear, guilt, and shame within us, is an extremely pleasurable experience. But if we have fear, guilt, and shame within us, and we're subjected to this reflection of what we would like to become, and yet we are not there, and we feel very bad about our past choices, you can see where the conflict could come up with in us trying to reconcile who we are with who we'd like to become to be. And then we start to have some negative feelings about it. So it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can kind of give us a reset to be able to go back and try again without having so much of the negativity that we've carried along with us, like rocks in the backpack. So we get to remove the rocks in the backpack. And even though we still have the tendency to err, we have a much better chance to go forth and sin no more after going through the planet of Saturn. I'm spending a lot of time on that one because that's people often wonder, how do we overcome it when we fall so far off the path and become addicted as that? The next planet, or the second dimension, is Neptune. And Neptune rules over imagination, psychic abilities, and the unseen realm. So you can count on it if you run in or encounter people, or you are yourself psychic in your abilities, you probably spent some time on Neptune in between the last life and the current one. You can bet that Edgar Cayce did for sure. And of course, I'll just point out what you're seeing right there is the Chat GPT 4.0 depiction when I said show a bunch of ethereal souls, traveling to the planet or realm of Neptune. So that's what the AI, artificial intelligence, comes up with for that understanding. So if you really want to be able to come into a lifetime of great imagination, say you're going to be a Rowling, the one that writes the Harry Potter books, or C.S. Lewis just had an amazing imagination for being able to fictionally depict, the traditional Christian standpoint of how things would go on Earth through, just fantastic stories. And that kind of imagination is able to be reinforced on the planet Neptune before we come into this particular human lifetime. Third dimension is not Earth, it's Mars. And, Cayce often referred to Mars as being the place that embodies the qualities of war and aggression and drive. And so if you have problems with anger management, you would wind up being here. But it also, if you tend to have been more milquetoast in past lives, or more passive and not really going out there and taking charge, especially when it's something that you believe in, for either of those sides of the equation, as it does with each one of these dimensions or planets, you can go there in order to enhance the better qualities of it, or to be able to learn to spiritualize the negative qualities of it. And so that's Mars. Venus is the fourth dimension. And Venus was described by Cayce as being the planet that embodies love, beauty, harmony, and creativity. Now, of course, we're looking at the positive side of that, but I would say that probably envy or coveting or even lust would wind up, even though there's a sexual aspect to lust, that to be able to just lust would be, a characteristic or an attribute, negative attribute, that we would be able to manifest in the earth, and you would be able to partially deal with that in the dimension or planet represented by Venus. Uranus is a connection to innovation, revolution, and the unconventional. I know that one of the, actually more than one famous inventor of the past. One that just popped into my head was Eli Whitney, inventor of the cotton gin, and others that had made important discoveries or came up with important inventions in the past. And if you're really trying to have an unconventional approach, I would even say an Albert Einstein would have spent a lot of time on Uranus when it comes to an unconventional approach and connection to innovation. In fact, Einstein said that a high IQ is not nearly as important as to have a creative mind when it comes to solving the riddles of the universe. And so Uranus is, you have these traits within yourself is probably one of the places that you spent time in between one life and another on the earth plane. Mercury. Mercury rules over aspects of thought, speech, and learning. Oftentimes, Mercury is attributed to people with a very high IQ. If you're a member of Mensa or an even higher organization, Intertel, that takes the top 1% of the IQs of the population as their membership, chances are you spent time in Mercury in order to be able to have those kinds of attributes to the physical life that you were getting ready to live. I think it's important to realize that the soul itself, all of us have the equal capability. But what we wind up doing is having a different part of us manifesting on Earth. Probably the best analogy I can give you for this is an iceberg. An iceberg floating in the ocean shows about 10% of what it truly looks like above the water level. 90% of what that iceberg is below the water level. But if in a particular lifetime we're supposed to have an average IQ, that's what shows above the water level, knowing that omniscience and omnipotence, because that's a part of who we are, how we were created, it comes together in the totality of seeing who we are. So if we're wind up being an Einstein one lifetime and not so mentally gifted in the next, it is a part of who we needed to be, the personality, if you will, for that lifetime in order to be able to learn the lessons that we did. Very often I encounter in what I do a lot of atheists, and atheists tend to be very intelligent, but their intelligence, as Jesus tended to put, they are wise in their own deceit, in that they wind up setting this impossible set of rules up in order to be able to say, God doesn't exist. Otherwise, we would be able to test every single person would be able to have an encounter with God, and it would be as consistent as the law of gravity. Well, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here as far as why that doesn't necessarily happen. But as much as having a high IQ can help you, it can also hinder you in your spiritual development. And we learn one way or the other as we venture into the planetary dimension of Mercury to be able to deal with that. And finally, we have Jupiter, Jupiter being the seventh planet and associated with the pituitary gland. And it's the planet of luck, growth, and higher learning. This is also in terms of leadership. In the Greek and Roman mythology, remember that Jupiter was also known as Zeus, which was the highest or the pinnacle of all of the rulers on Mount Olympus. And so of all of the gods, this was the one that was in charge of them all. So when you're talking about higher learning or the pinnacle of the whole thing, if you have leadership issues in order to be able to work through, sometimes it makes you a better leader, and sometimes it's trying to help you to not be a control freak, if you will, of trying to say, I need to have absolutely everything under my control in order to make sure that nothing goes wrong. So both of those things can be addressed when you enter into the realm or dimension of Jupiter. So that's the seven centers, the seven dimensions, the seven places that we wind up going. Now, a question can come up, is it possible for us to go outside of the solar system in order to be able to gain knowledge? And of course there is. There is no time and space. There are no set written rules that can't be broken. When it comes to trying to do God's work, there is no law against what makes sense in the best way in order to do that. So can people wind up going to another galaxy or solar system or something like that in order to learn something? Yes, we can. However, we tend to stay here because we're enmeshed here. This is where we came to Earth and wound up making the sinful or selfish choices that keep us coming back to it. We're addicted to this place. And so, in working through our addictions, Christ has met us with the answer or the escape from the choices that we've made by staying here and providing everything that we need right here in order to come through it. So, both things are possible. I just don't want to. It tends to dilute so much when you go in a long ago in a galaxy far away. All of these interesting things happen on Star Wars. Oddly enough, it's the same problems of thinking that power and fame and money are more important than the spiritual lessons. So I don't care how far away you go, it's still going to be the same challenges that we have to overcome, just like we do here on the Earth, no matter where you go in the universe. So the next step and what happens on the other side is planning our next life. I kind of like the depiction that Chat GPT 4.0 came up in the artificial intelligence of saying we get ethereal help. First of all, we can go, well, I think I need to be this male businessman, who's going to be a white collar worker. And there's the ethereal help showing on the scroll before it, as well as on the interesting design, kind of holographic design behind him that's saying, here are all of the things that are going to unfold in that life as it starts right now. Here are the people, the family that you will have, the siblings that you will have. Here are the talents, your intelligence. How good looking are you going to be? What are the opportunities that are going to be presented to you? And what are the overall earth things, whether it be war or famine or things like that are going to occur during that lifetime that are going to affect our spiritual growth and the ability to get together with that. And so all of these things are covered. And the higher we are in our spiritual development, the better we are at being able to say, I would rather go in this direction than that and have it be helpful and helpful to us. Obviously, if you're not very spiritually developed, you go, well, I should be king and I should be rich and famous and powerful and everybody should love me. So, well, that's a great thing to go into. I don't know how much that's going to teach you to become a kinder, gentler, humbler person that really is looking out for the best of everybody instead of just self. So you can see how the higher spiritual development interferes or helps, depending on where you are on that spectrum, with choosing your next life. So you get to figure out, this is what I want. Then the next thing that comes up is well, I'll come back to that in a second because I have another slide for it. But it's talking about rest and relaxation on the earth plane. So there was an interesting time. It was Cayce had finished a reading, and all of a sudden another inquiry for a reading came up before he came out of it. And oddly enough, it came up from the other side. As you can see, back on July 9th, 1934, he was coming out of a reading, and it came up in the reading that guess what? There's folks on the other side that want to talk with you right now. Is that okay? And that's what was coming out of Cayce. And so Gladys Davis was there going, see, please proceed. And what happened and what's depicted in the picture right there is it's kind of showing somebody on a telephone having a conversation with these ethereal beings that are all gathered around to talk to them. Well, let's say they all have telephones and they're talking to them, but nobody else in the room where the human being is was able to hear what was going on in the phone. And so what you get is something much like a one-sided telephone conversation in which we hear what Cayce was experiencing and responding, but we're not hearing what's being said by the ethereal beings. So I've collected some excerpts from this particular reading in order to be able to give us some hints of what it's like on the other side. So the reading number, if you want to look it up for yourself, is 575613. And again, these are just excerpts. So I'm starting with one out of paragraph 3. And it starts in your, again, this is just what Cayce is saying out loud. So he's responding to a question. And over there, they just said, he says, Len, like, and I put it Hugh, Len, in there because it was asking, how is Edgar Cayce's oldest son doing? Oh, yes, he's at home. You knew that, huh? Any ain't any difference. Like, it's no different between what you know here on Earth and what is known from the other side. All right, so on the other side, if they want to tune into the Earth plane and see what's going on, they're able to do that, and they do that. And then he said, well, how about the weather? Oh, the weather don't affect you now. Don't change, as in the weather doesn't change at all. And then he backs up and goes, oh, you have the weather you want, or you have what you want, and it depends on where you go. Well, I kind of depict that with the AI picture to the right, in which you have one guy sitting inside his house on a phone. He's having a conversation, and going on all around him are different weathered patterns. And of course, he's only going to have the one that he's in 3 dimensions. But on the other side, they could be playing baseball right in the midst of somebody else sitting inside a electric store, depending on what it is that they choose to experience for themselves. Because there is no time and space. There's only, what we create with the mind. And so if you recognize that there is only one consciousness out there, and that's God's, and each one of us has our own consciousness that lives and moves and has its very being within that consciousness, you can wind up having all of these things take place in that, what science probably calls the singularity, or the mind of God. So moving to paragraph 5, there is a question. Now, the question is coming from Gladys Davis Turner. It could be coming from Gertrude Cayce. I don't remember which in this case. But I think it's Gladys saying, I don't hear. Will you repeat the message for me? Because Cayce had said, oh, of course I can hear you. I hear you fine. Not realizing that all that was coming out was what's out of his voice. So then Cayce does comply. And the answer is from Cayce saying, Mama and Dr. House and Uncle Porter and the baby, we're all here. So he's kind of parroting what's going on right there and saying, this is what they're telling me. Grandpa's built a nice home here, and it's nice. All right. And we are all waiting until you come, you, Edgar Cayce, and we will all be here ready. We are getting along fine, doing well. Yes. So what you're seeing here is that, yes, they're all gathered together. The same family is gathered together in a soul grouping on the other side. And just as you can wind up, and here's how I'll put this. You can have an architect put together a set of building plans, and then all of a sudden you can have a computer that'll do a rendering of that building, very much like you see with this grand house behind Grandpa right there with his tools. Or you can actually be Grandpa and say, I want to build that house. So I have a set of plans, and ethereally on the other side, I'm going to have all of the lumber and tools and help that I need in order to be able to put this place together. And so he could choose to construct it, or he can choose to build it with his mind and just have it come into being. It's up to us what we want to do. So that you can see that on the other side, we have the ability to control the weather, and to be able to build the house, to gather together with the friends and family that we've always wanted to be with. And notice that they weren't always getting along fine, but now they are getting along fine. So that was part of the message in there as well. It's a little easier to work out your differences when you're very spiritual on the other side and not having the conscious mind with the secular thoughts and values to be able to deal with. In paragraph 5, it's once again, Cayce is still repeating what's being said. Yes, I still play baseball. And Charlie has recently joined my club. Charlie was another friend or family member that had recently passed on, and Edgar knew that. And so Charlie has joined the baseball team on the astral side of the world. And whoever was offering this says, I am still captain to many of them. Well, we will be waiting for you. So apparently Edgar gets to come over and be on the baseball team when he finally passes away. Since that was about a little over 10 years before he died, you can tell that they don't really care on the astral plane. Now, because it didn't identify who was speaking in paragraph 5, paragraph 6, it had, I think it was Gertrude Cayce in this case, was saying, who was that speaking? And Edgar said, who was this speaking? Hugh. And it was letting Gertrude Cayce's brother, Hugh Evans, was the one that was the captain to many of them on the baseball team. I kind of like the if you build it, they will come image that they wound up coming up with on artificial intelligence for that there's still a baseball team coming on. Now, here's an interesting way to look at this. On the astral plane, we are not subject to the three-dimensional laws of inertia and gravity and the laws of motion, so to speak. So you wind up not being subject to that unless you choose to be. So they couldn't be playing baseball if you didn't very well have any gravity or mass around you. So they create a mental environment in which baseball can take place. That's a lot of power on the other side to be able to just at your whim create whatever it is that you want. It also answers an implied question of why is the earth so important? It's so important for our soul development because we can, the next shiny object that comes along can draw our attention off so that we don't continue to work on the spiritual lessons that we really want to make better in our life. And this is just one example. I said, well, life's going kind of lousy right now. I think I'll go create a baseball team and go have some fun. And away you go. When you're on Earth, because we limit our existence to these three-dimensional bodies and time is in sequential order, some things you just have to go to work and you just have to make a paycheck so that you can pay the bills or not and find out what the circumstances are that arise from that decision. So the earth is very unique in being able to say, hey, you got a physical body to take care of now. And guess what? We put insert into the conscious mind the absolute necessity of being able to survive. So when you start to get hungry and you realize I'm so hungry I could actually die from malnutrition, you tend to get more motivated to start being a little more responsible instead of running off to go play baseball. I hope the point's made there. I don't want to go on and berate it to death. Back to paragraph 3, because I almost passed over that, and they were asking about somebody within the family. And so he was mimicking, or here's what Cayce was responding, oh, she, the relative, is in another change. Didn't say another realm, another this, another that. It doesn't, maybe change means from one planet or dimension to another. It could be somewhere else entirely outside of the solar system, but she is in another change. And then ask the question, how long will they stay there? Meaning, the people that went on to this other change. Oh, they don't count time like that. So in other words, kind of like the depiction was, I told ChatGPT to come up with an image that shows everybody being showing a different time on their timepiece, that in their reality, each one of them is a time line unto themselves. And so when you said, how long would they stay there? You can't answer that question in days, weeks, months, years, and things like that. So it's making it clear just for this phone call, if you will, from Edgar Cayce, that time is not counted on the other side as we do over here. And then finally, I pulled this last one out of there. There are many other points that were made, but most of them were about family members. And that is in paragraph 9. And it had to do with one of the family members. Well, oh, you don't like to hunt now, because apparently the guy was just addicted to whatever was in season. He would go out there and hunt and kill. And obviously that was the way that people survived on Earth. He thought he really liked it so much that he would continue on the other side, that even though he wasn't doing it to be able to feed himself, once that you took that part of the equation away from hunting, he didn't want to hunt anymore. So it's I just bring that up in order to be able to show you what our likes and preferences and how they can change on the other side. Now we come to, it's actually up to the end of the presentation, because I talked about we've already decided what it is that we want in our future life. And we've worked that out with the ethereal council, if you will, of the people that are our guides and angels in the Christ consciousness that is working with us to be able to figure out what the best life we can have in front of us the next time we incarnate into the earth. And once we've come up to that, then it's time to try it on earth again. And so we're rested, we're refreshed, we've learned new things, and it's time to go out there and find a willing family and a suitable body so that we can take everything that's happened in between the lives that's made us be enthusiastic about going back into the earth and trying to become a better person. And I think a good analogy for this is like winning the lottery. Let's say, most lotteries have 6 numbers. And so you've got your number sitting right there. And the first number comes up, and let's say your number is 1, and the number that comes up is a 2. Well, guess what? That 2 means that in my case, that the body that I was looking at was going to be a female. And I needed to be a male this life in order to be able to correctly meet the lessons that were for my greatest soul growth. So if the body is a female, then all of the females that are out there as possible bodies for me to inhabit are going to get put to the back burner. So I'm only looking at the males. Then you go to the next one. You say, well, what has to happen? Are there any infirmities that I will need, or things that I don't need? Let's say that you come in and you've got some kind of mental deformity. You're going, no, I need to have my full wits about me, as good as that can get, in order to be able to go forward. Or it could be the other end. You said, I need to be challenged in my mental capacity, and so I only look for lifetimes at that point. So that's the second of those ping pong balls that come down. And then the third one would be, the family and family members, and the job and life conditions and what part of the country are you going to be born into? When you realize that when Cayce gave astrology readings, that he would not only want to know the date and time, but the place, the location in which you were born, because one of those important factors is where you were born on the Earth, as far as what are all the planetary effects on you like that. So you go through that, and when you wind up hitting all 6 of those balls together, you win the baby lottery. And so you can see the soul being inserted, if you will, inserting himself and being connected via the silver cord to that particular body right there to go through that lifetime. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So I've covered from the time that we died to the wonderful, homecoming that we have, and the life review, and then we get to go on to figure out what it is that we are going to learn, go to the various schools as we rest and relax and have enjoyment as well as schooling on the other side, to pick the other life and all of the characteristics that we want the body that we inject our soul or insert our souls into, and finally come out. Being born on the other side into the earth is just like dying on the other side. So it's really just one transition from one side to the next. So if you would like to ask any questions, you can do that on our YouTube channel. I usually answer the questions there within 24 hours. Or if you'd like to request a PDF copy of this presentation, I'm happy to send it out. There's nothing on here that's copyrighted whatsoever. And you see the email address of edgarcayceaz@gmail.com on there to do so. And I do thank you for joining me.